if you're learning the minor pentatonic shapes and you're finding it a bit overwhelming and confusing, there's an inner pattern that will really help you understand this and unlock these shapes. So for the purpose of the video, we're going to talk about the patterns of the scale, but it's always recommended to learn the intervals, learn the notes, and really understand what you're playing. So this video's not to replace that understanding, okay? Please don't watch this and think you don't need to learn any of the theory or the notes or the intervals. I still think you should. But if you're struggling with these shapes, this is a nice visualization tool that I found helpful. Now bear with me because it can sound a little bit confusing to begin with, but hopefully it will help give you some clarity. So if you look at the 5 shapes to begin with, they can look completely disjointed, unrelated, and just messy. But actually there is what I call an inner pattern to the minor pentatonic scale that's the same in all 5 shapes. And I call that wides and narrows, okay? So with a wide is when there's a 2 fret gap, and a narrow is when there's a 1 fret gap. So if we look at shape 1, which you're probably already familiar with, it starts with a wide, okay, 2 frets gap. It then goes into the narrow, 1 fret gap, 1 fret that we're not playing. We play 3 of those narrows, then we play 2 more wides. Now this wide, they're the same notes that we play up here, which means if we had more strings here, this would just be an ongoing pattern repeat. Now a wide, 3 narrows, 2 wides, back to the narrows. And that's all the minor pentatonic is actually doing. All 5 shapes follow that pattern. You're playing 2 wides, 3 narrows, 2 wides, 3 narrows, every shape. Now, because we've only got 6 strings, it's true that the pattern gets interrupted. But it gets interrupted in a repeating style. Okay, now what I mean by that is we've got the low E string and the top E string. So the notes we play in every shape are the same on these 2 strings, okay? So shape 1 starts with a wide and ends with a wide. Right, shape 2 begins with a narrow and ends with a narrow. So I picture the fretboard, the vertical shapes, as a conveyor belt. So let's look at this a bit more closely. Shape 1, wide, 3 narrows, 2 wides. Shape 2 begins with a narrow, then the 2 wides, then the 3 narrows. And again, we finish how we started. Shape 3 begins with the 3 narrows and then the 2 wides. Shape 4 begins with the 2 wides, then the 3 narrows, then the wide. And shape 5 looks like it breaks this pattern a bit more, but it doesn't. So shape 5 is 2 narrows, then the 2 wides, then 2 more narrows. So the starting point of the shape changes, right? So as I said, shape 5 you're starting with the 2 narrows, shape 4 you're starting with 2 wides, shape 3 you're starting with 3 narrows. But if you visualize this loop, it starts to make more sense. It's just this repeating patterns of 2 wides, 3 narrows, back to 2 wides, back to 3 narrows, every single shape. Now, as far as understanding the inner pattern, the root note is always in the same place in each shape. Now where that is under your index finger of the 2nd wide and your ring finger of the 2nd narrow. So let's start with shape 4. Shape 4 is the easiest way to visualize this because we start with the 2 wides. And shape 4, the root note is on the A string. Then we go into the narrows. And this is the root note. That's the octave. Okay, so we run out of room here. So we go back to the top. This is the same note. And then back to the root note. So shape 1 Shape 1 is the kind of confusing one because if that's the shape you learned first, you start on the root note, which makes you think the root note is the first note in this pattern, but it's not. If you think of shape 1 as actually starting on the second wide, just as we see at the end of pattern 1. Okay, so pattern 1. First wide is here. This is the second wide, which is the same. Okay, now again, so this is the second wide, so the root note's under your index finger. When we go into the narrows, 1, 2, this is the second narrow, and your root note is under the ring finger. Third narrow, index finger of the second wide. So for shape 2. Shape 2 begins with a narrow, and then it's 2 wides. That's the root note under the index finger of that second wide. Then the 3 narrows turn up. That's the other root note. Okay, the octaves. Then the third narrow. Shape 3 begins with the 3 narrows. That's the root note. And there's your octaves. Shape 4, as I said, begins with the 2 wides. There's your root note under the index finger. Then the 3 narrows. There's your root note. So we come back to this first wide, conveyor belt imagery, same notes, and then we kind of repeat that through. Shape 5 begins with the 2 narrows, which means you're beginning on the middle narrow. Okay, so the root note is here, it's on the low E. Then the next narrow, 2 wides, second wide, index finger, root note. That's the octave. Finish the wide, 2 narrows. There's your index, there's your root note, sorry, under the ring finger, same as up here. Okay, the 2 E strings mirror each other in terms of what the notes are. So shape 5 one more time. Narrow, root note here. Narrow, 2 wides, root note here, 2 narrows. So as you start to link these shapes together, you can see how this all joins up. And I think a good way to practice this, to learn these shapes, instead of just running through them, is play the root note twice, because then you're really guaranteeing that you always know where it is. So for example, shape 1, there's the root note, we're going to pause and play it twice. That's how we play shape 1. To play shape 2, sorry, that's not shape 2. To play shape 2, okay, so we're really just taking the time to linger on those root notes, to play it twice, to pause, and that's going to really help ingrain this, I suppose, both in the brain and muscle memory under your fingers. Shape 3, we start with the 3 narrows. That's a root note. Shape 4. And shape 5. Okay, now just one quick note here, you'll note I'm playing the 5 shapes in roughly the same place. This is just for the purpose of the patterns and the shapes that I'm doing this for video. Obviously, if you're learning the 5 shapes for one key, you would be playing much more along, as in shape 1, shape 2, shape 3, okay, and then, you know, shapes 4 and 5. So you're playing horizontally. I'm playing in the same place just to demonstrate the 5 shapes, not suggesting that's the same key. So that really is, in a nutshell, the inner pattern of the minor pentatonic scale. Now, I think this method of visualizing it probably doesn't work for everyone. Everyone has their own preference and ways of learning. So I think regardless of your way of learning, it's probably beneficial to know the root note is always in the same places in every shape. That is under your index finger and under your ring finger. That's true in every shape. And that's probably helpful to most people. You'll always know where the root note is just by familiarity with the shape of those 5 shapes. If you already know how to play the 5 shapes, you've memorized and you're comfortable with them, then you know that's probably all you need to know. This way of looking at it is really just for people who see a mess. When you look at those 5 shapes and you just can't see how they work together. I like that conveyor belt pattern, which is 2 wides, 3 narrows, 2 wides, 3 narrows, and it just loops. So really the only reason they break up and look different, you know, shape 5 being 2 narrows, 2 wides, 2 narrows, and shape 1 being 1 wide, 3 narrows, 2 wides, the only reason they look different is really because the starting point, you know. So if that doesn't work for you, feel free to discard it. I get that not everyone likes to look that visually, learn that visually at things. But hopefully, if you've been struggling, hopefully that will help you. And the main thing is to know where the root notes are in every shape, because the benefit of doing that is you can then solo in any shape. Okay, so let's say that for whatever reason you're playing around in this area of the fretboard and you're here on this B. Now, even if you actually haven't learned the shapes really intimately, you can actually still play, because you know if this is the root note, you've got 2 options. You can treat this as the middle narrow, in which case that's shape 2. Or you can treat this as your index finger, and that's shape 3. So how do we know? If you don't know the shapes, how would you know to do that, and how would you know what shape it is? By learning wides and narrows. Okay, so if you treat it as being under the ring finger, that means you've got a narrow above and below you, which means these have to be wides, and it has to go back to narrows. So even if you didn't know how to go into the other 5 shapes, you can comfortably hang around in this vertical position and sound good in what you're playing. Or if you want to go this way, again, you know you've got 2 wides, and you know this is the second one, which means if you go in this way, this has to be a narrow because you've run out of wides. And that means if we're going this way, that has to be a wide. That's shape 3. Okay, and that works anywhere. Let's say you're here. Okay, this is your starting note. It's your root note. If you want to go that way, again, we're in the second wide, which means this has to be a narrow. That's shape 4. And you'll know this even if you don't know that it is called shape 4. You'll know just through wides and narrows that this is your root note, this can be a wide, and this has to be a narrow. Or if you're on this note and you wanted to play that way, It's exactly the same thing as what we did down here. Okay, this is my middle. Now I'm playing under my index finger, sorry, my ring finger, sorry. Shape 3 again, right? So the thought process here is, this is my root note. I can make it play my index finger and go this way, in which case it has to be a wide, or I can go this way and it has to be a narrow. And we're in shape 3 because you know there's a narrow above and below you. So we've done the 3 narrows there, 2 wides. Okay, so again, this doesn't replace learning the intervals, learning the note names, being able to play these joined together. But again, if you're struggling with the minor pentatonic scales, this works for me, and I know it works for some other people. Not everyone, but it's a way of learning the shapes too. Especially if you're memorizing the 5 shapes. Try this. Try and pick a note, any note, to be your root note. So let's say you wanted to play with the root note of B. You could be here. You could be here. You could be here. Okay, and you could be elsewhere, obviously. But just pick a note. Choose a starting point on the fretboard for that note, and without thinking about this is shape 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just play the pentatonic shape. That's 2 wides, 3 narrows, 2 wides, 2 narrows. Always loops. So I hope that helps. I apologise if this has confused anyone. I think there are going to be some people who this clicks for, and there are some people who are going to think I've just been speaking a completely different language for the past 17 minutes. So good luck with it. If you have a different approach that works for you, stick with it. This is really just for people who need that different way of looking at things. And yeah, good luck. Let me know if it helps. Let me know if it doesn't help, and keep on doing whatever you're doing to keep you focused on the instrument.